Well, it is 8:45 p.m. on the west coast of the United States. It is, let me think for a second, 0345 GMT, is that correct? This is 420 Legalization Nation for the 6th of May, 2015. Thank you for being here. A lot of interesting news stories just in the past 24 hours to bring to your attention, one of which is a major celebrity. Now, it's often not surprising that Hollywood celebrities speak out on marijuana. I feel like whenever a Hollywood celebrity or someone typically known to be liberal leaning in one way or another speaks out on the topic, it's kind of like a yawn. And yet when it's somebody of a certain magnitude, I don't really care about which way he leans. It's actually cool to hear what they have to say, period. And we have an Oscar winner coming up, not just an Oscar winner, somebody who actually taught me to read. We'll explain coming up. Also, Texas and Louisiana have legalization methods or pushes going on in one way or another, and there was a major traction in both of those cases just today. CNN released a story on how to talk to your kids about legalizing pot, and of course, the story I want to start with, which is where we will begin here. Fake marijuana, that is to say, synthetic marijuana, sends a bunch of people to the hospital. So let's start with that. That is not the story I wanted to bring to you. The story that I wanted to bring to you is this one here from the folks at Fox in Connecticut. I've talked a lot about Fox and how it's not always the conservative outlet people think it is, but we will look at this story, especially when it comes to local coverage of stories. I feel like Fox reporters very often do a good job on the local level. In this case, this is just going to be a basic news story. Synthetic marijuana sends a dozen people to hospital in Connecticut. This is called K2, and its use is causing many to seriously fall ill. Police sent a warning about a possibly tainted supply of K2, the synthetic marijuana, which sent a bunch of users to the hospital in a 24-hour period between Monday and Tuesday this week. This is Wednesday night, so it's really in the past 48 to 72 hours this has gone on. It's believed the synthetic drug was laced with another substance. Unclear what that substance might have been. Quote, personnel that we have encountered who have ingested the tainted product have displayed psychotic behaviors requiring immediate hospitalization. We're cautioning those persons using this synthetic drug to be very aware of the very serious medical consequences that can be expected with the use of this product, said Corp Stanley F. Parizo Jr. He's the Willimantic Police Department Public Information Officer. Again, this is, I think, not an illegal product, but it certainly isn't going to create the effects that users are wanting. Wyndham Hospital in Willimantic confirmed and admitted 5 people displaying symptoms of the drug in the last day, although that number contradicts the figure offered by police that they transported 12 to the hospital. Now, the number of people transported doesn't always reflect necessarily the people admitted to the hospital. It may be 7 people that were treated and released, kind of a thing. The regional director says increased blood pressure, increased heart rate, reports of hyperthermia, that's excessive heat, you're too hot, according to a person who works in the emergency room at one location. Tuesday afternoon, the Connecticut Department of Public Health and the Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services are issuing their own warnings about the dangers of synthetic marijuana. The departments say synthetic marijuana is a designer drug that in fact contains no marijuana, but rather a variety of plants sprayed with lab-made chemicals similar to THC. Yeah, you're not gonna be able to tell me that many of the people, and I believe this is a bogus argument, so I'll start with that, but the people who purport to be activists for marijuana in one way or another usually say that it is because it is of its natural nature, if you will. It's not man-made, and that is why it is better, it is superior, it is less toxic. Well, there are just as many things that are natural from nature that are toxic, and just as many things that are synthetic that are not toxic. So that is sort of a specious thing to say. That said, I don't think this synthetic marijuana is doing anybody any good. According to the statewide health alert, reports of adverse health effects associated with synthetic marijuana use have increased lately. The Connecticut Poison Control Center through April 28th of this year says more than 2,300 people reported exposure to synthetic marijuana to poison control centers. Last year, a total of 3,680 reported exposures, only 2,600 in 2013. So it's spiking. It's an increase. A big factor in why the number is so high this early in the year is due to a huge nationwide spike in exposures in April, while 359 people reported exposures in January, 273 in February, and on and on. And in just the first 4 days of May, there have been 163 reports. So this mass issue in Willimantic, Connecticut, hit at the tail end of the nationwide spike. Side effects of synthetic marijuana include extreme nervousness, anxiety attacks, an increased heartbeat and blood pressure, tremors, vomiting, hallucinations, and seizures. No, thank you. Synthetic marijuana is formulated with known and unknown chemicals, some of which are suspected to be extremely hazardous to health. According to the health agency commissioner there, that agency is coordinating with other state agencies and poison control to evaluate additional steps they can take to address the use of that drug. So the public should be aware of the dangers of synthetic marijuana use. I don't know many people who are smoking regular marijuana, or I say smoking, ingesting it, whether it's edible, whether it's smoked, or whether it's, I guess there's no injecting marijuana, I was going to say, but all of the ways in which you can ingest marijuana, you don't notice people who are suffering from severe illness and hyperthermia and hallucinations and vomiting and tremors and blood pressure and heartbeat and anxiety attacks and extreme nervousness, etc., 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 etc. Just smoke regular pot, people. If you need to get high, just find regular pot. Now, there's people who can't because of drug tests. Those people ought to probably look into some kind of substance abuse program, because if you really need to get high that bad and to the point where you're willing to do this to yourself, maybe you either need to get out of the job that requires you to have the drug test or just find something else to entertain yourself. People probably would want to shoot me down for that. I feel like that's probably not a very popular thing to say, but hey, just don't smoke fake pot. Just don't smoke synthetic bullshit weed. Either find a way to smoke weed or get over the need to get high. I feel like that is extraordinarily rational and reasonable thing to say, and yet it's, I don't know, it's still probably, I feel like, not a popular stance to take. What's the surprising state that could be the next to legalize marijuana? Well, if we look at the folks at the Weed blog, it's Ohio. We covered this last night on the program. More and more voters in the key battleground state could be voting on marijuana legalization in November, and we've covered not only that, but the battle between the two groups that are trying to push for marijuana legalization. In Ohio, the controversial pot legalization initiative is already well on the way to qualifying for the ballot. Its backers, or should we say investors, have the cash on hand to make sure that it does. Pot legislation or pot legalization bills pending in any number of states, and early on there were hopes this would be the year a state legislature would get around to legalizing it. New England states like Maine, Massachusetts, and Vermont looked like the best bets, but now it doesn't seem like it is going to happen. 2016 promises to see a wave of legalization initiatives. Think Arizona, California, Nevada, Maine, and Massachusetts for starters, with Arkansas, Michigan, Missouri, and Ohio also likely to see serious efforts emerge. Really an interesting set of states there, but that is next year, according to this website. The group responsible, Ohio, who we covered on this show last night, is well on the way to putting the issue before voters in the Buckeye State this year. They've already had their proposed constitutional amendment approved for signature gathering, and paid signature gatherers are cruising toward the qualification for the ballot. They need 305,000 valid signatures. So far, they have 180,000 raw signatures. Those are the ones that are not confirmed yet. We will continue to cover for that. Just to make sure they're safe, they say they're campaigning for 700,000. So that's quite a thing. So, okay, let's move on to the other states where there's actually been progress and sort of things happening just today. In the Texas House, the committee there has okayed the full marijuana legalization bill. This is for the folks at KXAN. KXAN is the NBC affiliate in one region in Texas. I'd like to be able to tell you where. Austin, apparently, it looks like. KXAN is Austin, which is the state capital of Texas. This Associated Press article says, a proposal seeking full legalization of marijuana on religious grounds has cleared an unlikely legislative hurdle. Republican State Representative David Simpson of Longview argues marijuana comes from God and therefore shouldn't be banned by the government. Interesting. Isn't that an interesting take? It comes from God, therefore it shouldn't be banned by the government. You don't see that sort of thing coming from Republicans that often. The two-party stalwart has repeatedly championed what he calls the Christian case for legalization. It's a bill that languished for weeks before the House Criminal Jurisprudence Committee. 3 committee Democrats and 2 Republicans surprisingly voted to support it today, and it's passed 5-2, which makes the bill eligible for consideration to reach the House floor before the legislative ends June 1st, although they say that is still highly unlikely. If there was any states where I would suggest marijuana probably won't get legalized very soon, Texas would be in the top 3 of that list, I feel like. State law currently makes no exceptions even for medical marijuana, making outright legalization unthinkable. Still, advocates hailed the committee vote as unprecedented progress for Texas marijuana rights. So that from the Associated Press through the NBC affiliate KXAN. Meanwhile, in the Louisiana legislature, sentencing reform has cleared the first hurdle. So this is not legalization, this is not medicalization. This is something we have talked about before, the kind of the third tier in the process. Many states who are doing the full-on legalization of recreational pot for adults 21 and over, like Colorado, Washington, D.C., and so forth. Other states have done the medical marijuana legalization, which is sort of the secondary step for folks who have various medical conditions and have a doctor's prescription. They can obtain medical marijuana through a state-approved dispensary, and all of it is, of course, taxed. And then the third step, where it's not legal, really even for medical purposes, but they have reduced the penalties for possession, certain small amounts. They have reduced its sort of decriminalization effect, and that is what we are seeing happening here in the state of Louisiana. Let's go ahead and look at this article. Marijuana sentencing reform, they're calling it. The New Orleans lawmaker easily moved his bill reducing penalties for simple marijuana possession past its first hurdle today in the Louisiana legislature. State Rep. Austin Baton's legislation, House Bill 149, drops the maximum sentence for second offense marijuana possession from 5 years in prison to 2 years. So this is not quite the very simple third step we were talking about last night. This is sort of a second part of it, if you will, where they were talking about first-time offenders who are caught with less than an ounce. If it's your first time and it's less than an ounce, you're not going to get in a lot of trouble. You may not even go to prison. Now, if it's a second offense, that's going to be a problem. And in this case, they have the second offense prison sentence at 5 years, and that's the maximum sentence. And they're now going to drop the maximum sentence for a second offense of possession of marijuana to 2 years. So again, baby steps, as we say. And as for first third offense possession, it would drop the maximum sentence from 20 years to 5. Just to pause for a second. Such a sliding scale we're talking about here, right? Because there are states where recreational pot is as legal as the liquor store on the corner for adults of consenting age, 21 and over. And then there are the states where if you do it wrong, you can get 20 years for a third violation of just possession. Not even dealing it, but just possession. Maximum offense, 20 years. Maximum sentence, that is, 20 years for a third offense of possessing marijuana in Louisiana. Well, they're working on reducing that, according to this story. And, interesting. This person who is behind the bill, Baton, says it's a well-studied measure to produce reform and reduce recidivism. He's brought the same or similar legislation to the legislature for nearly a half decade, so that's 5 years worth of working on this. It advanced today from the House's Administration of Criminal Justice by a vote of 10-4, now heads to the House floor before moving to the Senate side for consideration. I don't know a lot about the particulars of the two houses in the Louisiana legislature, but it does seem like, well, baby steps, as I said. Under current law, a first-time offender could be jailed up to 6 months. That sentence would stay the same under this proposal. Fines would also be reduced. Maximum fines for second offenses would be reduced from $2,000 to $500, and for subsequent offenses from $5,000 to $2,000. This could save taxpayers, they say, approximately $12 million over a 5-year period. The representative has referenced two highly publicized criminal sentences, that of a former athlete and a resident of New Orleans, Bernard Noble, illustrating that marijuana penalties are out of whack in that state. Of course, you have to realize another thing, and this is something that does get said, I think, probably fairly regularly, and rightfully so. The states where alcohol is big business do not like marijuana. They don't like people being able to get high, because if you're going to get high, you're going to get high the way we say is appropriate. And in places like Louisiana, where New Orleans is a big drinking city, and let's face it, the good old folks at Mardi Gras time do a lot of the alcohol imbibing. Well, let's just say they're probably not motivated very highly to get the marijuana sentencing reform pushed through or reduced really in any way, shape, form, or fashion. In a press statement last month, the representative has said he finds it disingenuous when you can have an ex-football player get 9 years in jail for using potent narcotics to sexually assault women. That would be the case of Darren Sharper. And then of the New Orleans resident, Bernard Noble, a guy sent away for 13 years for having 2 joints for his own personal use. So think about that. A guy who used narcotics to sexually assault women, ex-football player. Hey, we love our football players in this country, even if they are sexual assaulters, even if they're, wife beaters, no matter what, even if they're murderers. We often get them, rich people get very special treatment, and rich athletes get extremely special treatment very often in many places where, people are simple, they like their sports, and they don't care if it's out of whack or if it's sort of double standard or anything like that. Removed from the legislation, however, is a measure that would exempt marijuana simple possession from the habitual offender law, known as the three strikes law. So let's reread that. There was a measure that would exempt marijuana simple possession from the habitual offender laws. So if you have 3 strikes for cocaine or 3 strikes for alcohol, DUI kind of a thing, that's probably going to really screw you. They looked like they were trying to exempt marijuana simple possession from that law, and that has been removed from this legislation. Representative Ebony Woodruff of Terrytown, Democrat, voted in favor of the legislation but expressed disappointment that it doesn't go far enough. There are some forward-thinking people in Louisiana, surprisingly so. She took issue with the fact that the bill still makes second offense simple possession a felony, mentioning the Noble case in which a man was sentenced to 13 years in prison for possession of those 2 joints, as we mentioned. ACLU's executive director in Louisiana, Marjorie Esmond, says while she supports lowering marijuana penalties, she opposed the bill because it doesn't do enough. So, again, it's interesting that people can be opposed to a bill that is taking a baby step forward because it's not a big enough step. This will do nothing for the woman who testified about her son, who's serving 15 years at Angola, noting the legislation is not retroactive, would not apply to inmates who are already incarcerated. So if you're already in jail or prison in the state of Louisiana for marijuana possession, and if, say, you were one of those 3 strikes folks, or even if it's your second or third offense only, you would not have anything change under your situation if this bill should happen to go through the Louisiana legislature. Directors of 2 influential lobby groups, the Louisiana Sheriff's Association and the District Attorney's Association, I wonder which side they're on. Well, they appeared at Baden's side and complimented his collaboration with them to get the legislation complimented his collaboration with them to get the legislation is an acceptable posture. Not sure I get that sentence. They complimented his collaboration with them to get the legislation as an acceptable posture? I don't know. The groups took a neutral stance on the bill but removed their opposition. I see. So they were opposed to it. Now they're neutral on it. That's, again, a baby step. Opposition from those groups on criminal justice is a bill killer in many cases, according to this article. Again, the source here, NOLA.com, N-O-L-A.com. I think that may stand for North Louisiana, maybe. Baden says his amendment removing the habitual offender application was a compromise he made with the lobbying groups after he learned simple marijuana possession was actually rarely a factor in the application of 3-strike sentencing. All right, well, that makes me worry a little bit less about it. It may not technically be that you can get nailed for a 3rd strike and really get nailed to the wall for simple marijuana possession, but apparently, according to the lobbying groups at least, it sounds like that's not really happening a lot in the first place. So to push for that to be a factor or a sticking point probably is not worth canceling the whole thing. State Representative Terry Landry of New Iberia, Louisiana, said the legislation most affects poor citizens of Louisiana. He commended the associations and Baton for working together and indicated that further reform has to occur. He says it's not working for us, locking them up and throwing away the key. Here, again, the overly simplistic approach by many law enforcers and many people who just blindly support all law enforcement, period, want to say that, yeah, lock those potheads up and throw away the key. Well, that's not reasonable. That's not rational. It's not logical, and it's not just. So, as this state representative said, they got to be progressive. They got to try and think of a new solution. I hate the phrase "think outside the box." That's actually the quote from this person, Terry Landry, and spectators at the hearing cheered at that. We have the list of people voting for and against it. Another bill on the Senate side, I should say, also sponsored by a New Orleans Democrat, seeks to lower penalties for possession of small amounts of marijuana as well. The legislation, Senate Bill 241 from J.P. Morrell, carves out a new section of the law that deals strictly with possession of an ounce or less of marijuana, or synthetic marijuana. Interesting, that's in this bill too. All of the offenses would be considered misdemeanors if you have less than an ounce. So again, it's sort of not the radical legalization you're seeing in the states of Washington, D.C., or the state of Washington, or Colorado, but again, it seems like it's an improvement over the previously existing situation. Maximum penalty for first offense possession of an ounce would be a $100 fine, ounce or less. First offense, $100 fine. Second offense, $500 fine, max, and 30 days in jail. And maximum penalty for a third or subsequent conviction would be a $1,000 fine and 90 days in jail. Now, this bill has not yet been given an initial hearing, but again, the headline from Louisiana, it clears its first hurdle by passing through the, I want to get it right here, it passes through the first hurdle in the Louisiana legislature by advancing from the House's Administration of Criminal Justice, I guess subgroup or whatever that is called, and the vote was 10-4. So it wasn't even a squeaker, it wasn't even a close vote. Folks in Louisiana legislature, in many cases, seem to have their heads on straight, and hey, good for them. We're always happy to hear that. Let's look in Minnesota, where the first marijuana crop is reportedly now in bloom. This is a news story from the Minneapolis Star-Tribune. I'll switch over to it here, and you can read along with me because no reason for you to look at my ugly mug when we're talking about this stuff. Minnesota's first marijuana crop is now in bloom. From the StarTribune.com. And there we have it, posted by author Jennifer Brooks. In an Otsego greenhouse, Minnesota's first medical cannabis crop is in bloom. Young marijuana plants, fuzzy and pungent, stretched toward the skylights as Dr. Kyle Kingsley threaded between the plant beds, leading state media on a tour of the Minnesota Medical Solutions Facility, which is going to supply half of the legal medical marijuana in Minnesota. They described it pretty Spartan. Bare walls, concrete floors, banks of monitors scanning the secure facility and its perimeter. There's a faint skunky smell in the air that visitors notice as soon as they reach the first of 3 locked doors which lead into the building. We put our focus on science and medicine, said Dr. Kingsley, continuing to walk among rows of seedlings and plants. More than 4,000 plants and dozens of cannabis strains fill the greenhouses and spill out into the atriums. The company found out in December it would be one of the state's 2 suppliers and is making plans to expand this summer. Their focus is on suffering patients and getting patients medicine as of July the 1st. Minnesota is just months away from marijuana legalization for medical purposes. Between now and July 1st, these plants will be culled, dried, and distilled into enough pills and liquids to serve an unknown number of patients with a limited number of severe medical conditions. The folks, doctors, chemists, horticulturists, and staff say they'll be ready when the company opens its first dispensary. That's July 1st, less than 2 months away now in Minneapolis, and 3 other retail locations will follow over the next couple of months. Leafline Labs, which will be producing the other half of the state's cannabis crop, plans to open its first dispensary July 1st also. It's always challenging to be a pioneer, says Dr. Andrew Bachman. If trailblazing were easy, everyone would do it, he said. We're thrilled by the prospect of the smile on someone's face when they get the medicine they need. I almost feel like that's said with a nudge, nudge, wink, wink scenario. I mean, obviously, the people who have cancer, undergoing chemotherapy, who have HIV, the real seriously medically ill people who benefit from marijuana in the most severe cases, no doubt, are going to be pleased with this. And that would put a smile on people's faces. I always read a quote like that, though, with an asterisk in the back of my mind. You know, are they also sort of going, the people who have back trouble, wink, wink. The people who have migraines, wink, wink. Now, obviously, people who have migraines and real legit back trouble do find relief from marijuana, as do people with sleep disorders, as do people with anxiety, as do all kinds of people. But many doctors say that list is too long. The list of things marijuana can cure is actually inflated by certain measurements, certain metrics, and certain doctors who are more conservative about it than, say, the doctors that you meet in California. Leafline hasn't opened its facilities to tours yet, but Bachman, who grew up playing in the greenhouses of his family's garden stores, says he has had a visceral response to the little marijuana plants growing in his company's facility. Plants he said society has been taught to view as bad or dangerous. The first day I saw our plants, it made me sad and somewhat angry. I looked at a beautiful little plant. It smells like tomatoes. It grows like a plant. It just happens to have a lot of mysteries and secrets in it that we deserve and patients are ready to unlock. That is a pretty emotional statement there. As a person who's always grown plants, his family had garden stores, right? Now he is a doctor, Bachman, Dr. Andrew Bachman. He's an emergency room physician and co-founder of Leafline Labs. So he's one of the medical marijuana proponents, but he's also just a gardener in a way. And he sees that, you know, it's a plant. Why would, you know, we don't want to burn all the tomato plants. We don't think all the strawberry plants need to be thrown away just because of a particular set of features or, you know, whatever that these plants have. The anti-marijuana people would say, yes, but it's noxious, it's dangerous, just like the ads that we watched last night. But again, if you happen to be at all aware of the people who really struggle with the need for this medication, it's actually pretty interesting. Next to the plant rooms at MinMed, chemist Connor Smith scans the peaks and valleys on a chromatograph in his laboratory. One peak charts the amount of THC in the cannabis sample, the psychoactive compound that gives marijuana its buzz. Another measures the therapeutic cannabidiol compounds. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right. Cannabidiol. Cannabidiol? This particular 50-50 blend might go to a cancer patient fighting nausea from chemotherapy, as I mentioned a moment ago. On a table in the next room, a rainbow of bottles shows off Minnesota Medical Solutions product lines, pills, vaporizers, vials, droppers for oils, each color-coded green, blue, yellow, purple, according to potency. Minnesota is taking a uniquely clinical approach to medical marijuana. Instead of sending patients home with a baggie of the drug, cannabis will be sold only in refined pill or liquid form. Isn't that interesting? This is the only state where I've heard that this happening. The system is not popular with some patients who might prefer more traditional and cheaper forms of the drug, but it does allow the company to control the quality and the potency of the drug and track how effective doses are for some patients. Speaking just sort of logically from my own experience and perspective, one of the reasons why people like the ability to have vaporized or smoked marijuana is that very often if you're having, say, vomiting from nausea from chemotherapy because of your cancer, you can't keep a pill in your stomach. Anything you try and swallow is thrown right back up, and that's why the alternative administration method of smoke is kind of an important key factor in a lot of these patients. That said, they did say the word vaporizers earlier, so hopefully vaporizers at least will get some of those patients taken care of who are unable to keep something in their stomach due to vomiting from chemotherapy. Smith says, who is Smith? Let's go back and make sure we see who's Connor Smith, chemist at MinMed, says, it is really interesting. Other states aren't doing this. He has a doctorate in inorganic chemistry from the University of Minnesota. Dr. Kingsley said the company has been deluged with applications from scientists and clinicians interested in getting in on the ground floor of the fledgling industry. I like doing research, and right now we're turning research into products. It's a very interesting process to try and optimize the research from the plants. He began building the facility months before he knew whether the state would select his company as one of the designated medical cannabis manufacturers. He took the risk, he said, to ensure he'd be ready for the summer start, ready for the patients he saw in his practice who were battling agonizing diseases like pancreatic cancer, and hoping this new drug might offer them at least some relief. Thousands of other patients and their families are taking more than just a clinical interest in the crop. Kim Kelsey and Kathy Engstrom both have sons suffering from serious seizure disorders. They have joined the tour that was offered today. Yesterday, let's look at the date on this. I believe it said May 5th, so this would be yesterday. They don't know if their boys will benefit from medical cannabis. They're eager to try after years of fighting to get the bill passed in the legislature. They have hope. Okay, when we talk about their children, this is a 23-year-old son who has suffered from life-threatening seizures since he was 4. And they're saying, and I've heard this repeatedly, it's given them hope that they are really, really, the first hope they've really had in a really, really, really long time. Many stories of children and adults with seizure disorders who have benefited from cannabis oil, even if the treatment doesn't help her son. Kelsey said the state's research into the effectiveness of this drug might help others. Who doesn't want a miracle if you have a sick child? She's quoted as saying here. This is quite a long story. Well, we're almost done with it here. Let's finish it up. There is no way of knowing how many patients will sign up for the program. Registration begins in June. I believe they said the dispensaries open July 1st. The health department's best guess is around 5,000 patients, although that number could jump if the state expands the program next year to include patients suffering from intractable pain. Assistant Health Commissioner Manny Munson-Regala, overseeing the cannabis rollout, isn't expecting to see long lines outside dispensaries like seen in other states. It won't be like Black Friday at Best Buy, he said. Minnesota's had less than a year to put its medical marijuana program together. Plenty of people were skeptical that it would be up and running in time. I feel like we've done the best we could do to ensure that the folks who need medicine get it and abuse is minimized. So, again, they're worried about the abuse. Who can get it in the state of Minnesota here? Patients can enroll in the program if their doctor certifies they have a qualifying condition. There will be 8 dispensaries located in these cities. Drug will only be sold in pill or liquid form. That seems to say no vaporizers, even though the earlier part of the story suggested vaporizers were part of the accoutrement here. And then there's the health department for the state of Minnesota. Never having been, let's just look at some of these comments. Sometimes the comments are very depressing. Sometimes they're very eye-opening. For the people trying to pass on anecdotal assumptions of recreational cannabis use onto Minnesota patients who medically need cannabis to stay alive, you're simply moronic in your false judgments. Oh, I see. Our people deserve this medicine. This is a supporter. Never having been a marijuana smoker, I'm curious about one thing. Alcohol can contribute to things people wouldn't do sober, such as steal, cheat on a spouse, do mean or rude things to others out of revenge or to get them back. The list could be long. This is to name a few. Can marijuana contribute to people doing these things they might later regret or wouldn't do when not under the influence? And then there's the people here who are saying, obviously not. That's kind of a stupid question. I know a lot of people who gave up marijuana because it made them lazy, says this person. They said all they felt like doing was sitting around watching TV or playing video games. They said they couldn't get off the couch. Or lazy boy. They said it made them lazy and demotivated. They also said they craved Doritos and cookies and other junk food. Well, shocking. They literally couldn't stop munching. They said the combination of the heavy overdose of junk food and weed made them unlazy. Our body needs healthy food to be productive. Do we call that harmless? I'm trying to be fair and curious. I will say this. Having smoked a little bit of pot in my history, I will say that one of the things that doesn't ever get said hardly ever is that the munchies can be satisfied with apple slices. Or with, some people like different vegetables or fruits or whatever. Eating really healthful food actually can solve the munchies too. It's if you're hungry and you fill up on salad, you're not going to still be hungry to eat Doritos. You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's all up to the person and the choices they make, but I feel like to say the munchies suggests only ice cream, only Doritos, only cookies, only Snickers, is short of the real truth, and is sort of something that even potheads have a way of not remembering to say. You know, people don't like vegetables all the time. I myself don't like cauliflower, for instance, but I like broccoli. I like apples. I like oranges. I like bananas. You know, I like celery with peanut butter on it, kind of a thing. And there's no reason why healthy snacks. Okay, you want to talk about healthy snacks? Let's talk about peanuts or other kinds of nuts or granola. Well, granola has fat in it, I suppose, but I mean, you're getting my point, right? Munchies doesn't have to mean junk food and bullshit food. I'm a big fan of junk food. I'm a skinny guy. I can eat all kinds of food, but the munchies can be satisfied with nutritious food. Okay. In case you're wondering what you've stumbled onto, this is the 420 Legalization Nation. This is a program I am personally doing kind of out of my spare time here, simply as a way of spreading the word. I'm not a pothead, haven't had pot for a long time. Last time I got high was New Year's, when I was actually in Colorado, in the legal state there. But before that, it had been a long time too. So, I mean, it's not really like I'm here smoking pot and talking about the news. I'm a journalist by trade, and I feel like this is a topic that is going to be increasing with news across the states, across the different levels. And whether you're talking about Louisiana on the third step, where they're reducing the penalties for simple possession, to legalizing, like in Minnesota, the second step, as I call it, the legalization of not recreational but medical marijuana for people truly sick with honest-to-God afflictions that marijuana can help. Or, as I call it, the first step, which is Colorado, state of Washington, D.C., right? Full-on legalization of recreational pot for adults 21 and over. And I feel like you just cannot go wrong thinking about that. Hey, let's think about this. Another one of the stories I saw, that's the one from Louisiana. Let's look at CNN here. CNN just today released a story about how to talk to kids about marijuana in this post-legalization age. And I think it's really interesting. Let's take a look at it here, this story on the CNN.com website, because it's really fascinating. Talking to kids about legal marijuana. CNN's been going on a really long kind of set of stories, and they do hour-long specials. So I don't know where that sound is coming from. Is it this one? I guess it must be this one. Let's close that story. Back to this. Kelly Wallace from CNN has filed this story as of 6 p.m. Eastern tonight, and they have they plug their CNN original series High Profits on Sunday nights. My kids are in elementary school, a little young for the weed talk, but I wonder. And she's heard from plenty of kids who say, well, it's legal, so it must be okay. We already have the messaging problem, so we need to come up with a new way to discuss it because kids are tuning us out. Well, they will. Kids will tune you out if they detect hypocrisy. Do as I say, not as I do is not good enough, and rightfully so, because that's just not it's not going to work in a lot of different ways. And as I've said repeatedly here, one of the things that's important to say is, from a medical standpoint, from a psychology standpoint, my college degree is in psychology, one of them anyway, so I feel like it's important to note that, and it's important to continue to say, even as a supporter of legal recreational pot, legal medical pot, kids shouldn't be doing it for a million reasons. The same reason kids shouldn't be drinking alcohol before a certain age. The brains are still in flux, things are still growing, and interrupting that with various chemical compounds is destructive in a long-term way. It seriously can mess up kids for a very long time to be engaged in smoking marijuana at the age of 8 or at the age of 13 or 14, that kind of thing. Puberty is still going on. Hormones and everything are still in flux, and it's important to remember that adults of a certain age are able to do it because their brains are not going to change anymore, and it's sort of a different story when you're talking about kids. What doesn't work is hammering children over the head with how, medically speaking, marijuana is bad for the developing brain. It's what I just got done saying, and it doesn't work, according to this person. This person is who? The author of Wits End, Advice and Resources for Saving Your Out-of-Control Teen. Is that Sue Sheff? No, that's Dr. Larry Wolk, pediatrician, the executive director of Colorado's Department of Public Health and Environment. The research is clear that using marijuana during adolescence could have a long-term impact on problem-solving skills, memory, critical thinking. Yet teens don't want to hear it. The research shows that it's like a turnoff, man. He doesn't say man, but he does say that it's like a turnoff. Instead of focusing on the health risk, Wolk encourages parents to talk to their kids about what they might lose if they use marijuana during teenage years. It's taking kids along the track of, well, you're putting in jeopardy your ability to do well in school or to graduate or to be successful once you get your driver's license, because marijuana does impair you if you're going to use it and drive. It does impair you if you're going to try to study or if you're going to try and do well in school or try to get a good job. And there are online resources for the parents as well. Terry Greenwald is a father of grown children in Alaska. He said he handled discussions about marijuana the way he tackled every other issue with his kids, with honesty. He told his kids how he smoked marijuana with college to fit in, and realized at a certain point he was on a path that would not lead to a degree, so he stopped. He ultimately graduated, while his friends who kept using marijuana never did. I told my children I did not want to see them learn as I did, and hoped that they would learn from my mistake. He says he thinks his approach worked. He doesn't believe his daughter smokes marijuana and said his son tried it but didn't like it. Kids are exposed to marijuana at very early ages, so parents are fooling themselves if they think they can shield their kids from learning about marijuana or finding out about it, especially in this day and age of the internet. I mean, that's another thing people have a way of forgetting about. You know, the teenagers of the 60s, the teenagers of the 80s, and the teenagers of today had very different sort of, I mean, culture was different, the marijuana itself was different, and the way in which they get information is different. And these days, kids are a lot more in touch with a lot more things on a much more global scale. Why? Because we didn't have the internet in the 80s or the 60s, right? It's going to be a very different story. And to try and tell them something that is not true or is marginally true or is sort of hypocritically true probably is going to fail you in a much larger regard than it's going to assist you. Would you rather have them learn about it from a street dealer or from an educated, informed parental point of view? Schumann, who's also called the cannabis queen of Beverly Hills, started using marijuana in '96 at age 36 after she suffered from PTSD following a sexual assault. The pharmaceutical drugs she was given to treat her PTSD stabilized her mood to the point where she thought she was a zombie, where she was like a zombie. She couldn't interact with her kids and had suicidal thoughts. Her doctor looked at her and said, "Lady, you need to smoke a joint." That was my first experience with cannabis, and literally it changed my life. Like most parents who are in the closet about their marijuana use, Schumann would sneak into the bathroom and try to blow the smoke out the window. The night she got caught by her daughters, they were then 7 and 15. They're like, "Mom, we smell marijuana." And it was that come to Jesus aha moment where I was faced with, do I lie to my children or do I tell them the truth? She sat her girls down and told them why she was using marijuana and how they needed to understand this is a medicine to replace the other medicine she was taking. Both of her girls cried and said, "We're just happy to have our mom back." Schumann said it's important for parents to talk to their kids about the risks. In addition to the impact on brain development, they need to know the legal risks, how if they're in a car and get pulled over and the officer smells it, they could end up in jail with a felony on their record. One of the things I saw, I forget which state it was, but it was on a rerun of Cops, the old classic show Cops from Fox TV. I don't believe it was on Fox where I saw it because they now rerun it on the Spike cable channel. It's a great show. I love watching Cops. And, very often good cops and bad people are taken away, and it's usually a thing I support. Some of those really, really old episodes where they're really busting potheads for simple possession can be irritating, but it kind of shows you in a way how far we've come. But the rerun I saw was from very recent, in the past 10 years, let's say. And it was a kid smoking pot with his friend in his car and got caught sort of on the street, up the street from his house, thinking he was just, kind of king of the world. And when he realized that not only was he probably going to be arrested and put in jail for possession of use of marijuana, his car was going to be impounded. That's something kids, I think maybe kids, especially of driving age, who decide the car is a place to get high, don't think about is if your car gets impounded, it's getting impounded. It's going to cost a lot of money to get that car back out. And that's another one of the big reasons why not to smoke pot in your car if you're a kid, certainly. If you don't have the financial resources to get your car out of the pokey. A lot of this is responsible parenting. Children have to be educated that just because marijuana is legal for 21 and over responsible adult use doesn't mean it's okay for you to use at 15. Same with alcohol. Schumann believes marijuana will be legalized across the U.S. in a short time. The genie is out of the bottle, she says. For parents and young people, for anyone to think otherwise, they're kidding themselves. The most important thing is to open the dialogue and get people talking. Mickey Morrison, a mom of 2 boys, aged 9 and 12, actually thinks the legalization debate encourages more open communication between parents and kids. I think every parent that has that conversation about alcohol because it's legal, so it's not taboo, it's okay to acknowledge your kids are going to be faced with alcohol. So in that sense, it makes it easier to broach the subject when you can buy it at the corner store, literally in some places. In Colorado, where unlimited recreational use of marijuana was legalized a year and a half roughly ago, policymakers are so far not seeing a jump in the overall teen use rate or a drop in the age at which teens start using marijuana, according to the Department of Public Health and Environment in Colorado. Wolk, who is from that agency, said his agency did a check-in this past fall with a small sample of teens who participate in a risk behavior survey the state does every 2 years. While the findings were not statistically significant, Wolk predicts the trend will continue if they're doing their job correctly, making the comparison to sexual activity and birth control, and how it's been shown that making birth control more widely available doesn't lead to kids becoming more sexually active. I mean, the people who are conservative and don't want kids to have birth control available because that'll just say, go ahead and do it. Well, those are people who don't study the statistics. They don't study what actually happens in places where that's happened. You know, it's important to look at the statistics. I'm not singling marijuana out, says Wolk. I'm asking for the same treatment of recreational marijuana use we would ask for other recreational substances that are legal yet potentially harmful to kids, including alcohol, tobacco, and you very rarely see people mentioning e-cigarettes. But kids are all over the e-cigarette thing because they think, hey, it's how you can ingest nicotine and not, have cancer. They think of it as the healthy alternative. And we've all seen time and again that the people who are the tobacco fiends, there is no healthy alternative. I mean, the ones who do the vaping love to vape in your face because it's not smoke and it's okay. It's basically, they think it's okay. These people are douchebags. And they also rattle off this stuff like, oh, it's based, it's formaldehyde. It's medical grade. It's fine. Medical grade formaldehyde, really? Would you drink it? I mean, you're inhaling it, but you wouldn't drink it if it were there. I just feel like the vaporizing people are really douchebags who don't have respect for, the people who don't want to breathe that shit, just even though it's not smoke. The fact that it's not smoke is inconsequential. Doesn't mean you still have the right to do it just about anywhere you fucking please. And by the way, we're now seeing laws that follow that logic as well. Changing perceptions. I wonder if we do come to a point in the near future where weed shops are just as common across the country as bars, whether parents will be as comfortable with their kids using marijuana as young adults as they would be with them drinking a glass of wine or a beer occasionally. Isn't that fascinating? You don't hear about that. This person says it's not what she would wish for her kids, but as her kids negotiate the real world and are exposed to alcohol and marijuana, moderation is the most important thing. Interesting, this is a study here related. Kids who sip are more likely to drink. Okay. Just as with alcohol, if you find yourself using alcohol every day, and especially throughout the day, multiple times a day, it can create big problems. But if it's something you do socially or occasionally, that's moderation. And this person, Nick Tatro in California, thinks language such as removing getting high from conversations can change perceptions too. Not every user, he says, gets high. They're doing it for a little bit of relaxation or a little bit of focus or a little bit of pain management, or they're doing it because they sleep better or their stomach digests food better. I really think it works against our cause in the industry if we're promoting getting high. Again, I think that's a really fascinating perspective. 420 Legalization Nation, you can tweet me here at the address on your screen if you have feedback. I am working on this podcast or this sort of live cast as a way of explicitly trying to get a job with K-High, the new AM radio station in Colorado Springs that has just replaced, I believe it was ESPN Radio 1580, I want to say, on the AM dial in Colorado Springs, Colorado. All weed, all the time, AM local radio. It's kind of a campy station, but it's very good. And I believe they need an intellectual, journalistic stoner supporter who can deliver the news in a fun, fast-paced, intellectual way. The problem with the programming they have now is it's a little bit on the gangster side, right? Bubba Kush this and the weed pimps that, and it's all kind of what's up and very hip-hop oriented. And I like that. I love that, but not everybody does. Not everybody identifies with it. Not everybody is receptive to it. And I feel like having a little bit more of a college-educated approach to some of the programming on a local level, not just the national marijuana news, which they also promote and play on their air, having a local, intellectual, college-based, college-educated, journalistic perspective is probably something that we can have as well. Let's finish with this as we wrap up in the last 10 minutes here. The great Morgan Freeman. I will just tell you before I start with reading the article that Morgan Freeman is a huge hero of mine for one reason. He helped me learn to read. The great Easy Reader in the 1970s reruns of the old PBS show, The Electric Company, are, classics, obviously, favorites of mine, very close to my heart, but also I've had the repeated experience, more than a couple of times, of I have the DVDs of the old 70s Electric Company. And I, travel with them from times when I travel or stay with friends who have kids. And I watch them. And sometimes I put them on with the kids in the room. And the kids, I have seen this now 3 different times with 3 different friends who have kids. The kids prop themselves up in front, or they sort of hear the music. It's very, very relatable, despite the clothes and the music and the hairstyles and so forth. They find themselves transfixed by it. They're instantly reading along with the words on the screen. They're instantly singing along with the songs. They are entertained. They are transfixed in no uncertain terms. So I feel like there's a very special magic to the program that we call the Electric Company from the 70s. There was a late 90s, early 2000s or something in the past 15, 20 years. There was a remake of the Electric Company on PBS. I got to tell you, well, it's probably more relatable to kids of today because there's much more of a hip-hop rap element to it. I believe that the experience I've had in showing it to kids and having them absolutely absorbed in it the very first time they watch it is very telling. And I think that probably is something that is not going to be true of the remake. But let's get back to the interview regarding the great Morgan Freeman, the Oscar winner, Morgan Freeman, and his discussion on legalization of marijuana. I don't even know what he's going to say. I glanced at it, but he says marijuana is the only thing that can help ease his pain. You've heard the voice, at once authoritative and passive, weaving every soothing syllable into an epic yarn, and so on and so on. Let's skip down to the thing. He says here, though, he is in a great deal of pain. The Oscar-winning film legend is in a great deal of pain. 7 years ago, he was driving across Mississippi when his 1997 Nissan Maxima skidded off the highway, flipping over several times. He was rescued using the jaws of life. He was medevaced to a nearby hospital in Memphis. His left shoulder, arm, and elbow were shattered. Doctors operated for 4 hours to repair the nerves in his arm, and he still hasn't regained the full use of his left hand and wears a yellow compression glove to prevent blood pooling. I asked him about his stance on the legalization of marijuana since he's a longtime user. They used to say, "You smoke that stuff, boy, you get hooked," says a chuckling Freeman. My first wife got me into it many years ago. How do I take it? However it comes. I'll eat it, drink it, smoke it, snort it. This movement is really a long time coming, and it's getting legs, longer legs. Now, the thrust is understanding that alcohol has no real medicinal use. Maybe if you have 1 drink, it'll quiet you down, but 2 or 3 and you're fucked, he says. He pauses and points to the glove aid jutting out from his left suit sleeve. Marijuana has many useful uses. I have fibromyalgia pain in this arm, and the only thing that offers any relief is marijuana. They're talking about kids who have grand mal seizures. They've discovered that marijuana eases that down to where these kids can have a life. That right there says to me, legalize it across the board. And he goes on, what negative effects does it have? Look at Woodstock 1969. They said, we're not going to bother them or say anything about smoking marijuana, and not one problem or fight. Then look at what happened in 99, he said, referencing the less marijuana-friendly 30th anniversary event, which resulted in riots and arrests. Despite the injury, the 77-year-old actor remains one of the most prolific film stars in Hollywood, having appeared in no less than 4 movies in 2013 and 2014. His second of 4 movies out in 2015 is 5 Flights Up. It's a lighthearted romantic comedy about a couple, Diane Keaton and Morgan Freeman, looking to shed their cozy Brooklyn apartment and start anew. There they are together. Interracial couples, he says, he doesn't think is taboo. It doesn't really get much better than Morgan Freeman and Diane Keaton. I guess it goes on from here. But the great Morgan Freeman. I got to tell you what, the Easy Reader alone is one of the reasons, Easy Rita, that's my name. I mean, it's so campy, but I swear to God, it sticks with you. And it is not a lie that I was reading before I went to kindergarten. And the reason I'm here to tell you, my mom told me this, I didn't really remember this, but the reason I'm telling you I was reading at that time is because I was watching more than one rerun a day of the old classic, not just Sesame Street, but especially the Electric Company, because Sesame Street was there to teach letters, numbers, and colors, the very basic things. And then the Electric Company was a step up from that, right, in teaching reading. And so help me God, it's part of what made me who I am today. And I would love to interview Morgan Freeman someday, of course. Who wouldn't? All right, that is it. It has been 55 minutes since we began the broadcast. We're going to wrap things up. Do send me a tweet. This is the Twitter address. You can send it to me here. Reach me at any time of the day or night. And, of course, join us again at 8:30 p.m. on the Pacific Coast. That is 0300 GMT for the next 420 Legalization Nation.